On March 15, 2021, a shocking arrest in Denver, Colorado, didn't make it to television broadcasts or major newspaper headlines, but unfolded quietly on a chilly morning in the parking lot of the Denver Public Library. There, Robert Bob Callahan, 66, had just finished setting up orange barricades to block off a repair area, a familiar task he performed each morning with a leisurely pace and a kind smile. The security guard, beloved by generations of students and locals for his gentle greetings and pockets full of peppermint candies for children, offered no resistance when Detective Rachel Smith approached, clearly reading him his rights in connection to the murder of Emily Carter, a name that had haunted the city for the past 24 years. But to understand why that morning rewrote everything Denver thought it knew about itself, we need to go back to the night of December 22, 1997, when the first snowflakes of the decade's biggest winter storm began falling on Colfax Avenue. If you've followed cold cases, you know how critical initial details are, so make sure you're listening closely and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell to stay updated on the latest stories. Emily Carter was always punctual. At 25, her reliability made her indispensable at Union Grounds, a coffee shop in downtown Denver, especially for the closing shift on the night before Christmas, when couples and friends lingered over hot lattes. Her manager, Helen Price, later told investigators that Emily seemed distracted that evening, frequently glancing at the wall clock and peering out the frost-covered window, where patches of white snow began piling up on the sidewalk. The last customer left at 11 p.m., Helen remembered because she joked. Christmas came early, and Emily responded with a faint smile. When the shift ended, the cash register was balanced, chairs were stacked on tables, and the coffee pot was cleaned. Helen saw Emily pull her navy wool coat tightly around her shoulders before stepping outside, her breath forming thin wisps in the sub-zero air. Emily's 1992 Toyota Corolla, with a small scratch on the rear fender, sat alone in the employee parking lot behind the shop. It was a college graduation gift from her parents, and despite its age, it never failed to start, even in Colorado's harsh winters. What happened in the mere dozens of steps from the coffee shop's back door to her car sparked decades of unanswered questions. Jason Miller, a delivery driver heading home, recounted slamming on his brakes when his headlights swept over a strange scene. Emily's Corolla pulled over on the road leading to Red Rocks Park, the driver's door wide open like a mouth frozen in a swallowed scream. The heater was still running at full blast, the radio softly playing the classic jazz Emily loved. Her brown leather purse sat on the passenger seat, her wallet intact with $54.20 in tips from that night. Jason said, the moment he approached, an unnatural silence hit him, as if the surrounding space was holding its breath. Emily's coat lay crumpled on the driver's seat, still warm, and her keys dangled in the ignition. There was only a strange scratch in the snow on the side of the car, and a single white Converse sneaker, the left one, lying about 5 meters away, half buried in the thickening snow. Police Chief Thomas Bradley, elected more for his reputation coaching youth baseball than for investigative experience, immediately recognized this as the most complex case his force had ever faced. With a team of 8 officers covering the sprawling city and its suburbs, Bradley was forced to tackle a case far beyond their usual petty thefts and bar fights. The first 24 hours, as later became clear, were critical in ways no one grasped at the time. Deputy Mark Stevens, a recent criminal justice graduate, arrived at the scene after Jason Miller's 911 call. In the snow and darkness, Stevens made decisions that would haunt the investigation. He allowed Jason to drive the Corolla back to the station, inadvertently contaminating evidence. The scratch in the snow vanished under fresh flakes before it could be photographed, and the -5 degrees Celsius temperature made preserving tire tracks nearly impossible. The night of December 22, 1997, in Denver began with festive cheer. Christmas lights draped from old apartment balconies, shops on Colfax Avenue playing upbeat music, and the smell of roasted chestnuts wafting from the 16th Street Mall. But hours later, winds from the Rockies shifted abruptly, bringing heavy snow clouds over the city. Emily Carter finished her shift at Union Grounds on time. As always, Helen Price, the manager, vividly recalled the young woman tidying the counter with quick movements, though her eyes kept darting to the frosted window. Outside, the first snowflakes landed on the brick steps, melting into uneven wet streaks. At 11 p.m. the last customer left, and Helen teased, "Christmas is coming early." Emily replied with a thin smile and a slight nod. After balancing the register, stacking chairs, and cleaning the coffee pot, Emily donned her navy coat and stepped out the back door. The employee parking lot was quiet, with only a few snow-covered cars under the dim yellow streetlights casting long shadows on the white ground. Her 1992 Toyota Corolla sat alone at the lot's edge, the small scratch on its fender a distinct marker. She unlocked it, and the engine roared to life instantly. Inside, the heater quickly dispelled the biting cold. The radio played a late-night jazz program, the host interrupting songs with blizzard warnings. Emily shifted into gear, pulling onto the empty street, planning to take a shortcut through a residential area to Capitol Hill. The city was already clearing of traffic. Signal lights cast faint red and green circles on the snowy road. As she turned onto Alameda, she noticed a pair of headlights in her rearview mirror, far back. At first, she thought it was just another car going her way, but after a few turns, the lights stayed close without passing. A creeping unease made her grip the steering wheel tighter. The snow fell heavier, forcing her to slow down to avoid skidding. When she reached the narrow road toward Red Rocks Park, the trailing headlights suddenly vanished. Emily exhaled in relief, but it lasted less than a minute. Ahead, on the roadside, a dark pickup truck was parked at an angle, its hood slightly raised, hazard lights blinking faintly through the snow. A man in a heavy coat and a low-pulled knit cap stood beside it, waving for help. Emily slowed, her windshield speckled with snow blurring the scene. That moment of hesitation stretched like an endless void. She'd been taught never to stop at night in isolated areas, but the man's weathered face and the fierce snow made her pause. She cracked her window a few inches. His voice was carried off by the wind. "My truck's dead, can I use your phone?" Emily shook her head, explaining she didn't have a cell phone, and suggesting he wait for roadside assistance. The man nodded, seemingly grateful. Emily shifted into gear, starting to pull away. But before she could, a loud noise came from behind, a metallic crash. Reflexively, she braked, thinking she'd hit something. As she opened her door to step out, the man's figure loomed from the side, blocking her headlights. Everything after that shattered. The howling wind, frantic breathing, a heavy blow to her head plunging her vision into darkness. The Corolla's engine kept running, its headlights piercing the snow, the radio still playing. Her coat lay crumpled on the driver's seat, still warm. Her left sneaker sat alone in the snow a few meters away, half buried in the thickening flakes. No clear footprints led away. The wind and snow erased them, leaving only an eerie emptiness. A few hundred meters away, Jason Miller, driving his delivery truck home, slowed when he saw an odd light on the roadside. He would be the first to see the abandoned Corolla, but not the last to remember that winter night, the night that began a disappearance stretching nearly a quarter century. Jason Miller pulled over, wiping snow from his windshield, then stepped out into the howling wind, his own headlights cutting through the dark. Emily's Corolla was still running, exhaust forming white plumes that dissolved in the air. The driver's door was wide open, the gray cloth seat speckled with melted snow, her navy coat tossed aside as if someone had left in a hurry. On the passenger seat, her brown leather purse sat with its strap curled, her wallet untouched inside, along with bills and coins Jason assumed were tips from her shift. The left sneaker lay in the snow a few steps from the car, its sole leaving a faint imprint already fading under the wind. Jason called out several times, but his voice was swallowed by the storm. An unnatural silence gripped him, the kind that raises hairs on the back of your neck. After a moment's hesitation, he called 911 from the phone in his truck, his voice trembling as he described the scene. Less than 10 minutes later, a Denver police SUV arrived, its red and blue lights spinning against the snow. Deputy Mark Stevens, 24, barely a year into his badge, stepped out, shivering in his heavy coat. He questioned Jason briefly, then approached the Corolla, jotting down a few notes. But here, the first mistakes were made. Instead of sealing off the scene and waiting for forensics, Stevens decided to save time by having Jason drive the Corolla to the station, reasoning that the heavy snow would erase evidence and leaving the car risked accidents. Jason reluctantly agreed, unaware that touching the steering wheel, gear shift and seat could erase or add fingerprints not belonging to the perpetrator. Meanwhile, Stevens swept the area with his flashlight. The scratch in the snow beside the car was nearly gone, blurred by the wind. He bent down, touching it, but didn't photograph it. A decision that ensured the evidence vanished completely within half an hour as snow fell thicker. Other tire tracks, possibly from the perpetrator's vehicle, also disappeared under the wind-blown powder. At -5 degrees Celsius, every action needed to be quick, but instead of calling for backup, Stevens radioed a brief report and drove back to the station with Jason, leaving the scene with only a few scattered notes. At the station, Chief Thomas Bradley received the report and immediately saw this was no ordinary missing person case. But Bradley's experience with homicides was nearly non-existent. His career was built on handling stolen bikes, bar brawls, and minor community disputes. His 8-officer team, already stretched thin across the city and suburbs, wasn't trained to handle a potential murder scene. No urgent search or roadblocks were set up around Red Rocks that night, and no specialized crime scene unit was dispatched immediately. By morning, as a volunteer search team formed, the storm had dumped nearly a foot of snow, erasing all traces around where the Corolla had been. They scoured ditches, bushes, and abandoned buildings along the road to the park, but found no sign of Emily. Helen Price, called in for a statement, confirmed Emily left the shop at 11 p.m. alone, seeming distracted. Friends and coworkers described her as cautious, never one to pick up strangers, making her disappearance even more baffling. The police quickly zeroed in on an initial suspect, Tyler Briggs, Emily's ex-boyfriend, who'd had a loud argument with her months earlier. Briggs was questioned, his car searched, and the press quickly labeled him a suspect. But within 2 days, he was cleared with an airtight alibi. He was working a night shift at a warehouse in Aurora, confirmed by 5 witnesses. This not only stalled the investigation, but eroded community trust in the police, already criticized for their lack of expertise. In the following days, leads poured in. Someone reported seeing Emily at a bus station. Another claimed she was with a man at a suburban bar. Each tip sent police scrambling, but all led to dead ends. In 1997, street cameras were non-existent, and tracing landline calls took days, often fruitlessly. By the end of the first week, the crime scene was completely buried, evidence was compromised or lost, and initial leads were nearly worthless. The only items preserved were Emily's left sneaker and coat, sent to evidence storage but not tested for DNA due to the era's limited technology and budget. Missteps, inexperience, and harsh weather plunged the case into a deadlock within days, opening a 24-year void of unanswered questions. The days after December 1997 passed in heavy silence for the Carter family. Their 2-story Aurora home, usually filled with Christmas laughter, now held only the dim glow of a living room lamp, where Linda Carter sat for hours on the sofa, eyes red, staring at the phone. She waited for calls from police, Emily's friends, or anyone with a shred of hope, but most were just condolences, or worse, baseless rumors. David Carter, her husband, tried to stay calm, but his broad shoulders and steady voice, once the family's anchor, sagged. He called nearby police stations, hospitals, shelters, and even morgues, hoping for clarity if not good news. When Christmas arrived, instead of gathering around the tree, Linda spread Emily's photos across the dining table, alongside cards and small keepsakes, as if to keep her daughter present. But after the police admitted there were no new leads, Linda knew waiting would let the case fade. In early 1998, she began studying investigative processes, reading books, and noting details from case files the police shared. She set up a large board in the living room, pinning a Denver map marked with key locations, Union Grounds, the spot where the car was found, Emily's likely route, and witness sightings. Red strings connected the points, forming a tangled web she adjusted with each new piece of information. Linda knocked on doors near where the Corolla was abandoned, carrying Emily's photo and asking, "Did you see this girl on December 22nd?" Many offered sympathy, but no help beyond well wishes. Some avoided her, wary of police involvement. Linda also learned to handle anonymous calls, from attention seekers with false tips to vague voices saying, "She's gone," before hanging up. Despite the emotional toll, Linda kept the case in the public eye. Each year on the anniversary of Emily's disappearance, she held a vigil at Civic Center Park. They lit candles, displayed Emily's photo on a wooden stand, and invited local media. David often spoke briefly, his voice hoarse with emotion. "We won't stop until we know what happened to our daughter." These vigils became a community ritual, drawing not just Emily's friends and family, but others searching for missing loved ones. Linda connected with victim support groups, joined parent networks, and learned how to preserve evidence. At home, she kept a dedicated file cabinet with case-related items, police reports, crime scene photos, news articles, and scraps of paper with seemingly trivial details. At times, police updates rekindled hope. In 2004, when hikers found female remains near Morrison, Linda rushed to the site, heart pounding. But DNA tests weeks later confirmed it wasn't Emily. Such moments became a familiar cycle, hope flaring, then fading, leaving a growing void. David coped differently, working longer hours and volunteering at church to avoid the emptiness at home. But Linda couldn't stop. She felt pausing even a day would let the perpetrator win. They argued over approaches, but agreed on one thing: they couldn't give up. In 2010, as DNA technology advanced, Linda formally requested retesting of Emily's coat and shoe. The response was curt: limited budget, priority on new cases. This fueled her belief that without public pressure, Emily's case would stay buried. She reached out to journalists, retelling the story on local TV, mentioning early police missteps, a move that sparked controversy but brought Emily's name back to headlines. Each year, the living room map grew with new notes. A golden witness recalling a man matching the description near a Corolla that winter. An anonymous letter sent to their home reading. Ask the man at the library, puzzling Linda for months. Though many leads fizzled, she saved them all, believing one day they'd form an answer. For 2 decades, Civic Center Park glowed with candlelight each December for Emily's vigil. Her youthful face in the 8x10 photo on the wooden stand seemed unchanged, unlike Linda's graying hair and David's slowing gait, yet their eyes, gazing at their daughter's image, remained as resolute as the morning they got the news. All that time, they never knew that somewhere in Denver, the person who took Emily still watched silently, even passing through the park during a vigil, blending into the crowd like an anonymous figure in the bustling city. For years, the Carters had only fragmented, scattered clues, mostly from vague memories of passers-by that stormy night. Many tips came and went like wisps of smoke, leaving nothing solid to grasp. Then, in the fall of 2003, a new detail emerged, but it stayed buried for years before becoming evidence. Earl Simmons, a retired truck driver from suburban Lakewood, called the Denver police. His voice, rough from age and years of smoking, was clear in its story. Around midnight on December 22, 1997, while driving past the road to Red Rocks Park, he saw 2 vehicles parked close together on the roadside. One was a dark pickup with its hood slightly raised, hazard lights blinking faintly. The other, he vividly recalled, was a small silver sedan, which he later believed was Emily's Corolla, after seeing its photo in the news. Earl said the blizzard was intensifying, visibility poor. He slowed, glancing briefly, and saw a man in a heavy coat and knit cap near the Corolla's driver's door. He didn't see a woman, but assumed she was inside. Thinking it was just drivers helping each other in the cold, he drove on without stopping. When Emily's disappearance dominated the news days later, he felt uneasy but convinced himself if his information mattered, police would have reached out. The officer, taking his call, a young night shift rookie swamped with similar leads, jotted Earl's statement hastily into a report with no follow-up. No one interviewed him further, no sketch was made, and no search for the pickup ensued based on his vague description. His story, like hundreds of others, was filed away in a thin folder, buried deep in the Denver Police Department's archives. Years later, as age and illness set in, that night's memory grew sharper in Earl's mind, as if time had polished away excess details, leaving the core image. In 2018, diagnosed with terminal lung cancer, he knew his time was short. He wrote his story as clearly as he could, including it in his will, with instructions for his granddaughter, Megan Carter, to pass it to the victim's family or police. In a 3-page handwritten letter, he detailed the scene with previously unmentioned specifics. The pickup had a Denver-based transport company logo on its door, partly obscured by snow. The man beside the car was tall, broad-shouldered. His movements not like someone awaiting help. He kept glancing around, as if ensuring no one noticed. Earl wrote, he'd considered stopping to ask, but a gut feeling made him speed up, a regret that haunted him. Earl passed away in February 2019. Months later, while cleaning his home, Megan found an envelope labeled Emily Carter Case and read its significance. Though unfamiliar with the Carters, she'd heard the story growing up. Hesitant, fearing police dismissal as before, she contacted Linda Carter directly, finding her number through a community social media group. Linda received the call one August afternoon. Megan's trembling voice recounted her uncle's will and what he saw. When Linda heard about the pickup and the transport company logo, a chill ran down her spine. She'd once heard another witness vaguely mention a similar vehicle, but police dismissed it as unreliable. The two met at a small coffee shop in downtown Denver. Megan brought the original letter and a photocopy for Linda to keep. Reading the shaky handwriting line by line, Linda took notes and photographed it with her phone, determined not to let this information fade into obscurity again. She immediately called a familiar reporter from a local news channel who had previously covered Emily's case and sent him a copy of the letter. In the days that followed, Linda tried to reach the police, but bureaucratic processes and the indifference of some officers made her realize that without someone with enough authority to reopen the case, Earl's account would remain just a side anecdote. She didn't know that, in just a few months, this letter would fall into the hands of the right person to turn it into the key that unlocked a door sealed shut for 24 years. For now, all Linda could do was keep the letter as a vital piece in her file cabinet. She placed it in a clear plastic bag, tucked between maps, crime scene photos, and witness lists. Each time she opened the cabinet, she looked at it and told herself, one day, this will be the piece we need. Outside, Denver moved on as usual, while Emily's case remained at a dead end. But beneath the dust of old files and years of waiting, a small piece of information simmered, waiting for the right moment to ignite. And that moment, though no one knew it yet, was closer than ever. Earl Simmons' letter sat quietly in its plastic bag for nearly a year, until the name Rachel Smith emerged. In June 2020, the Denver Police Department formed a special unit to tackle long-standing cold cases, leveraging new generation DNA technology and genetic genealogy methods. Rachel, a detective who had previously worked at the FBI before returning to her hometown, was assigned to lead several high-profile cases, including Emily Carter's disappearance. On her first day with the case file, Rachel was struck by its sheer volume, hundreds of pages of reports, yellowed crime scene photos, and scrawled handwritten notes from the late 1990s. But what caught her attention most wasn't a scientific piece of evidence. It was internal critiques about poor crime scene handling and missing critical forensic samples. Rachel knew that to find answers, she'd need to start with the overlooked fragments. Among the accompanying documents, she noticed a file provided by Linda Carter years earlier, meticulously organized with notes and diagrams. Near the end of the stack, Rachel found Earl Simmons' handwritten letter, the original, with trembling but clear script. She read it slowly, underlining details: the dark pickup truck, the small transport company logo, the location near Red Rocks Park, the tall, broad-shouldered man. Rachel instantly recognized this as the kind of information that could be cross-referenced with vehicle registrations and employment records, something nearly impossible for police to do quickly in 1997. Before acting, Rachel decided to meet Linda in person. The meeting took place at a coffee shop near Civic Center Park, where Linda had held many vigils. When Rachel arrived, Linda was already seated, a leather briefcase full of documents in front of her. She looked Rachel in the eye, her voice a mix of hope and caution. "I've told this story to many people, and they all said they'd help. But then no one came back," Rachel responded firmly. "I don't promise what I can't deliver, but I promise to check every detail, no matter how small." Rachel took the letter back to the station and began cross-referencing. Within hours, she compiled a list of transport companies operating in Denver in 1997. Fewer than 10 matched Earl's description of the logo and color. She narrowed down drivers or employees who owned pickup trucks at the time. Meanwhile, she reviewed the preserved evidence list. Surprisingly, Emily's navy coat and left shoe were still intact, sealed in old evidence bags. In 1997, DNA testing wasn't feasible due to technological limits, but now, even a single fiber could yield results. Rachel sent a high-priority request to the state lab and also decided to test the Corolla, stored in long-term evidence. Though the chances of finding usable traces were slim, she believed every possibility was worth exploring. While awaiting results, she contacted Megan, Earl's granddaughter, to clarify details about when and how he shared his story. Megan confirmed that before his death, he repeatedly said, "Don't believe it was just roadside help," and expressed regret for not stopping. 2 weeks later, the lab called back. The results took Rachel's breath away. A male DNA sample, unidentified but intact, was found on the collar of Emily's coat, viable for entry into the National CODIS database. It didn't match any criminal records, but the lab suggested genetic genealogy using public ancestry databases to trace family trees. Rachel presented the findings to her superiors and requested an expanded investigation. Despite tight budgets, Emily's case had garnered significant media attention, and public pressure secured approval. A genealogy firm was hired, and within 3 months, they narrowed down a group of distant relatives of the DNA's owner, scattered across Colorado and neighboring states. The family tree shrank until one name stood out: Robert Bob Callahan, 66. A Denver resident and library security guard for over 20 years. What caught Rachel's attention was that in 1997, Callahan worked for a small transport company, one matching her list from Earl's letter. Employment records showed he owned a dark green pickup truck, like the one Earl described, and sold it in early 1998. When Rachel found old photos of Callahan from that time, his tall, broad-shouldered frame was unmistakable. She checked Callahan's work schedule for December 22, 1997. Records showed he worked an afternoon shift, ending at 9 p.m., giving him enough time to be near Red Rocks Park by midnight. Another detail emerged: Callahan lived just over a mile from Emily's home, and both frequented the same local supermarket. Before making an arrest, Rachel needed more physical evidence. She obtained a search warrant for Callahan's home, focusing on the garage and old belongings. In a dusty cardboard box, she found an old photo album. Among ordinary family snapshots was one of a dark green pickup, parked on a snowy road, dated 12/97. Callahan stood beside it in a heavy coat and knit cap, his posture matching Earl's description. When Rachel placed the photo next to the letter and crime scene map, the pieces seemed to align, but she knew the case needed one final step to hold up in court: confirming the DNA from Emily's coat matched Callahan's current DNA. She obtained a warrant to collect a sample and discreetly followed him. The opportunity came when Callahan discarded a paper coffee cup at a park near his home. The DNA from the cup's rim was sent to the lab, and the results were unequivocal: a perfect match. After nearly a quarter century, the Emily Carter case had a clear suspect. With all evidence in hand, Rachel prepared for the final step, the morning in March 2021, when Denver would witness an arrest no one saw coming. The investigation pinpointed Robert Bob Callahan as the suspect. But for Rachel, understanding this man, his background and relationships, was crucial to establishing motive and circumstances. As the team dug deeper, they found the Callahan name wasn't unfamiliar in Denver. The family had lived in Colorado for at least 3 generations, with members serving in the military, police, or city agencies. This inadvertently gave them a subtle shield from public scrutiny, possibly why Robert Callahan was never seriously suspected for over 2 decades. Robert was born in 1955 in a small town south of Denver. His father, Frank Callahan, was a strict but respected patrol officer known for settling matters quietly. His mother, Margaret, worked as a librarian, a job Robert later took up. School records described him as quiet but observant, seemingly harmless, but Rachel saw it as a sign of a reserved, unpredictable nature. Old neighbors recalled that as a teenager, Robert would drive aimlessly for hours on suburban roads, especially at night. In the 1970s, after high school, Robert enlisted, serving 2 years in logistics. Military records noted basic training in vehicle maintenance and first aid, but he was reprimanded for inappropriate behavior toward a female colleague. No charges were filed, the matter was handled internally, and it never reached the press. Rachel flagged this, as it suggested a pattern of unchecked behavior in opportune settings. After his discharge, Robert returned to Denver, working for a small transport company, matching Earl Simmons' letter. There, he navigated remote suburban roads, knew the routes to Red Rocks Park, and often worked late shifts. A former co-worker, when interviewed, said Robert liked stopping to help stranded drivers, but was once seen talking to a young woman in a car for an uncomfortably long time. By the early 1990s, Robert became a security guard at the Denver Public Library. This role gave him a new image, friendly with locals, handing out candies to kids, and chatting with elderly patrons. When Rachel mentioned his library job to Linda Carter, she froze. "There were years I went to the library for research. I might have walked past him without knowing." The thought made her shudder. What intrigued Rachel further was the Callahan family's murky history. In 1985, Robert's brother, Michael Callahan, was investigated for an alleged assault on a female student in Boulder. The victim couldn't identify the attacker, and Michael had a weak but sufficient alibi to avoid charges. The case was dropped. But records showed Robert was the first to pick Michael up from the police station, and both disappeared for 2 days afterward. Rachel wondered, did this family have a habit of protecting each other at all costs? Digging deeper, Rachel found an odd connection among Robert's extended relatives. At least 3 had worked in city administrative roles, including one in police records during the 1990s. This could explain why Robert's pickup or 1997 work schedule wasn't thoroughly investigated initially. There was no direct evidence of tampering, but the coincidence made Rachel wary. Rachel also sought any link between Robert and Emily. No record showed they knew each other, but they lived just over a mile apart and frequented the same supermarket. A former store employee vaguely recalled a tall, middle-aged man who often lingered near Emily's checkout, as if waiting for someone, though faint. This bolstered the theory that Robert may have noticed Emily beforehand, waiting for the right moment to act. The more Rachel learned, the clearer a pattern emerged. Robert often appeared where young women worked late shifts, especially in winter, when darkness fell early and streets emptied. She contacted nearby police departments for reports of women harassed or missing from the late 1980s to early 2000s. The results were startling. At least 3 other disappearances had similar circumstances, with no specific suspect. In 2 cases, witnesses described a dark green pickup near the scene. Rachel couldn't ignore the possibility that Emily wasn't the only victim, but to pursue multiple charges, she needed direct evidence linking Robert to those cases. For now, she focused on building a psychological profile, a discreet man who used his kindly image to approach victims, knew the area and weather conditions, and had a family willing to protect its reputation at all costs. Presenting her findings on the Callahan family to her superiors, Rachel emphasized, This isn't just an individual crime, it's a story of how someone can hide in a community for decades, partly shielded by family ties and social image. The report secured approval for Robert's arrest, with a careful plan to avoid leaks and prevent family interference. Linda Carter was informed of the breakthrough, and her reaction was both relief and deep anger. She thought of the lost years, standing near the man who might have killed her daughter without knowing. When Rachel described Robert's background, Linda said only, "He lived among us, and the whole city let it happen." The arrest was scheduled for a March 2021 morning at the library parking lot, where Robert worked. Rachel wanted him to know the circle was closing, that the place where he built his guardian image would become the stage for his downfall. And in that moment, the Callahan family's story wasn't just a backdrop to a crime, but a chilling reminder that sometimes the most dangerous person is the one you greet every day. On the morning of March 15, 2021, Denver's sky was clear after a light overnight rain, spring sunlight glinting off the public library's glass dome, as if it were an ordinary day. But in the parking lot behind the building, everything was meticulously set for a moment Rachel Smith and her team had awaited for nearly a year. An unmarked SUV, 2 patrol cars, and a civilian vehicle were scattered around, with plainclothes officers blending among library staff arriving for the morning shift. Robert Bob Callahan appeared at 7:45 a.m., as usual, wearing a worn gray coat, a Rockies baseball cap, and holding a steaming paper coffee cup. He didn't know that the night before, a judge had signed an arrest warrant for the 1997 murder of Emily Carter. As Callahan bent to open his trunk for a toolbox, Rachel and 2 officers approached. Her voice was clear and firm. "Mr. Callahan, you're under arrest for the murder of Emily Carter. You have the right to remain silent." The rest echoed through the light breeze and the stunned footsteps of library staff, pausing in shock. Callahan froze for a few seconds, his eyes flickering as if processing what he'd heard, then turned to Rachel with a mix of confusion and disdain. "What the hell are you talking about?" he snapped, but he didn't resist as he was handcuffed. News of the arrest spread almost instantly. A library employee recorded a short video of Callahan being led away, and within hours, it appeared on local news sites. For many, the shock wasn't just that the perpetrator of a 24-year-old case was finally caught, but that it was someone familiar who handed out candies to kids and helped patrons find books. In the interrogation room, Callahan sat across from Rachel and a Denver district prosecutor. Fluorescent lights reflected off the metal table, creating a tense atmosphere. He maintained a calm demeanor at first, leaning back with his hands clasped over his chest. Rachel started with soft questions about his work history, habits, and routes he drove in 1997. Callahan answered slowly, occasionally smiling as if it were a harmless chat. But when Rachel presented the photo of the dark green pickup from December 1997, found in his garage, Callahan's eyes faltered for a split second. She then read aloud from Earl Simmons' letter, detailing the man's description and location that night. Callahan crossed his arms, leaning back further, his voice lower. "What does that prove? People mistake cars on the road all the time." Rachel didn't argue. She opened an evidence bag, showing a photo of Emily's navy coat and the DNA test results, sliding them toward Callahan. "This is your DNA, found on the collar of the victim's coat. We also collected it from the coffee cup you discarded. It's a perfect match." This time, Callahan's composure cracked. He glanced at the prosecutor, then down at the table, his fingers tapping faintly, unconsciously. Silence stretched for over a minute. Then Callahan gave a faint, bitter smile. "DNA? I helped lots of people on the road. Maybe I just pulled her out of the car. Who remembers?" Rachel leaned forward, her voice steady as stone. "You didn't just help. You ambushed Emily, attacked her, and took her away. You knew a blizzard was coming. You knew the roads would be empty. You planned it." The interrogation lasted hours. Callahan repeatedly denied involvement, mixing vague answers with occasional sarcasm about young cops thinking they're clever. But Rachel stayed patient. She showed him a map of other disappearances with similar details, read witness statements about seeing him near the supermarket where Emily worked, and referenced the Callahan family's history of dodging suspicion. Each time Callahan's grip tightened, a small tell Rachel noted. By the end, when the prosecutor asked directly, "Do you want to explain to the Carter family why Emily never came home that night?" Callahan only smirked coldly and said, "People always need someone to blame. Go ahead." His refusal didn't shake Rachel's case. The DNA evidence, Earl's testimony, the pickup photo, and matching details were enough to prosecute. As Callahan was led from the interrogation room, Rachel watched, not with relief, but with absolute focus. She knew the case wasn't over. The upcoming trial would force the Carter family to relive painful details, and would be where the man who hid for nearly a quarter century faced the truth he tried to bury. 3 days after the interrogation, Callahan remained silent in the county jail, refusing to meet with the assigned public defender or contact family. But Rachel knew men like Callahan often couldn't endure prolonged isolation, especially when their trustworthy reputation was exposed. External pressure was mounting. Media outlets ran constant coverage of the arrest. Local stations replayed footage of him being handcuffed, and several other victims began contacting police about past uncomfortable encounters with Callahan. On the 4th morning, a guard reported that Callahan requested to see Rachel, a surprising move that she double-checked. Entering the glass-partitioned visiting room, she saw Callahan without his baseball cap, his gray hair disheveled, his face more haggard than a week earlier. He didn't meet her eyes at first, resting his hands on the table, fingers tapping lightly. "I'll talk," he began, "but not to the prosecutor. Just you." And no recording. Though Rachel wanted every word documented, she agreed, stipulating she'd write a report immediately after leaving. Callahan leaned back in his chair, taking a deep breath. "That night, I wasn't looking for her. I was driving by Union grounds, heading home when I saw the Corolla parked alone behind the shop. Door closed, lights inside the place already off. I parked a few dozen meters away. I'd noticed her a few weeks earlier at the supermarket. She had this way of smiling at customers, the kind of smile that made me think differently." He paused, as if choosing his words. "When I saw her come out, I popped the hood to fake a breakdown. She glanced at me, then kept walking to her car. I approached, asked for help, but she shook her head. I blocked her car door, and I don't know why I did it." Rachel stayed silent, letting him slip into the memory. Callahan continued, his voice lower. "I used my elbow to keep the car door from closing, then grabbed the collar of her coat. She fought harder than I expected. I pulled her out of the car, and one of her shoes came off. The snow was falling thick, no one around. I put her in the passenger seat of my pickup, tied her hands with cargo straps. She was still conscious, asking, 'What do you want?' I didn't answer." He described driving out of town, taking back roads toward Red Rocks Park. The blizzard limited visibility, but he knew every curve. "I only meant to scare her, then let her go somewhere. But when we reached an abandoned lot near the park's west entrance, she started screaming, kicking the door. I was afraid someone might hear. I grabbed a crowbar from the toolbox, and Callahan stopped, his hands clenching until the knuckles whitened. One hit. She went quiet. I knew it was over." Rachel felt her pulse quicken but kept her voice steady. "What did you do with Emily after that?" Callahan avoided her gaze, staring at the tiled floor. "I drove to an old hunting cabin I used to use, in the woods west of Morrison. I left her there, covered with a tarp. The next morning I went back, dug a shallow hole behind the cabin, and buried her. The ground was hard as rock, but the snow covered it fast. No one ever went there." He admitted returning twice, once to check if everything was still fine, and again to move some items so no one would suspect. He even joined a volunteer search party organized by Linda Carter. I stood just a few meters from her. She asked if I'd seen anything. I said no. She thanked me. I don't know why I smiled then. Rachel asked why he stayed silent for 24 years. Callahan smirked. No one suspected me. I lived quietly, went to work, attended church. The police asked a few questions, but nothing solid. When that Earl guy called about the pickup, I thought I was done for. But no one came. I knew I was safe then. Rachel mentally noted every detail, knowing that even without a recording, this confession could be critical if Callahan signed a statement. She pressed. Do you know what the Carter family has been through all these years? Callahan shrugged, a faint smile flickering. Looking for me, but they weren't good enough. Before leaving, Rachel handed him a summary of his statement and asked him to sign. He stared at the paper, then scrawled his signature, as if eager to be done. As she stepped out, Rachel saw Linda Carter waiting in the hallway, her eyes a mix of pain and resolve. Rachel nodded slightly. He talked, and were taking him to court. Outside, Denver's sky was turning gray, signaling a late-season snowstorm. For the Carter family, Callahan's confession was not just a painful truth, but the end of nearly a quarter-century in darkness, ushering in a new fight for justice to be served. News of Robert Bob Callahan's confession spread like wildfire. Within hours of the leak to the press, major Colorado outlets ran stories with headlines heavy with words like horrifying, betrayal, and heartbreaking. In Denver, where Callahan had lived and worked for over 2 decades, shock rippled through the community. Many who saw him as the model kindly neighbor realized a killer had been in plain sight, greeting them daily, even handing candies to their children. The public library where Callahan worked closed for a day for an emergency meeting. The board issued a statement expressing profound shock and sorrow over their employees' actions, pledging full cooperation with authorities. Some longtime staff cried, recalling times Callahan helped fix their cars, carried books, or joined community events. I can't believe it, a librarian told a local news channel. He was always the last to leave, making sure everyone got home safely. On social media, images of Callahan in handcuffs sparked heated debate. Many expressed outrage, but some bitter voices noted that if police and the community had listened to witnesses in 1997, Emily Carter might have been found sooner. A post from the Justice for Emily group garnered thousands of shares. We passed a killer every day. We smiled and greeted him. This isn't just a police failure, it's a lesson for us all. At Civic Center Park, where the Carters held annual vigils for Emily, people began placing flowers and candles around her portrait. The candles burned through the night, defying the cold wind, as a promise that Emily's memory would never fade. Linda Carter appeared that afternoon, saying little, standing silently by her daughter's photo, hands clenched, tears streaming, but eyes unwavering. Parents in the area held meetings to discuss community safety, especially protecting children working late shifts or traveling alone at night. Schools invited police to teach students self-defense skills, and some businesses where Emily worked started escorting employees to their cars after late shifts. National media picked up the story, placing it alongside other infamous cases of predators hiding in plain sight. Criminologists on air analyzed how Callahan used his friendly persona and job to mask his actions, pointing out missed warning signs. A retired investigator remarked, "This case shows how dangerous blind trust can be. We need to learn to question and verify." The Callahan family, long known as a prominent Denver lineage, faced intense scrutiny. Some distant relatives spoke to the press, expressing shock and shame over Robert's actions. But this didn't stop public questions about whether the family had ever shielded him. For those who joined the 1997 search for Emily, the betrayal cut deep. They recalled Callahan attending searches, quietly listening as theories were discussed. "He stood there among us, knowing where she was." "I can't forgive that," a volunteer said through tears. The case prompted the city to review its handling of cold cases. Denver's mayor announced an independent committee to examine unsolved disappearances and proposed increased funding for DNA and genetic genealogy. Many supported this, seeing it as hope for other families who shouldn't wait decades like the Carters. Rachel Smith, though avoiding the spotlight, became a symbol of perseverance. In a brief interview, she said, "No case is ever truly closed. One piece can change the whole picture. Emily Carter deserved justice, and we'll make sure it happens." That night at Civic Center Park, as the last candle was lit, Linda Carter looked at the silent crowd and whispered, "Thank you all. Emily hasn't been forgotten. And we won't let him forget this crime has a price." Her words blended with the night wind, a shared vow that justice, though late, would be served. Robert "Bob" Callahan's trial began on the morning of September 12, 2022, nearly a year and a half after his arrest. By dawn, dozens of reporters, news vans, and residents gathered outside the Denver County Courthouse. Some held justice for Emily signs. Others simply wanted to witness the moment they believed would close a 24-year painful chapter. Inside the courtroom, tension was palpable. Linda Carter sat in the front row between her two sons, clutching a photo of Emily smiling in a summer dress. Across the room, Callahan entered in an orange jumpsuit, hair cropped short, his cold gaze avoiding the Carter family. The 12-person jury, carefully selected over weeks, mostly hadn't heard detailed case facts to ensure impartiality. The prosecution opened by reconstructing the events of December 22, 1997. Emily leaving her shift, the Corolla abandoned with its door open, and Callahan's presence near Red Rocks Park at the time, witness Earl Simmons saw him. They presented crime scene photos, Megan Carter's testimony about Earl's letter, and crucially, the DNA test results showing a perfect match between Callahan and the sample on Emily's coat collar. A video reenactment of the snowy crime scene, based on testimony and 1997 weather data, left the courtroom in heavy silence. The crux was the reading of Callahan's confession summary. Rachel Smith testified, detailing the jail meeting where Callahan requested to speak and described exactly what happened. The defense objected, arguing the unrecorded statement could be distorted, but the prosecution countered with Callahan's signed confirmation. The defense tried to portray Callahan as a community good guy and questioned whether the DNA could have transferred to the coat in other scenarios. They also highlighted the 1997 investigation's flaws, sloppy crime scene handling that could have mixed evidence. But the prosecution struck back. Yes, the police made mistakes in 1997. But today's science filled those gaps, and the defendant provided details only someone at the scene could know. On the fifth day, Linda Carter took the stand. She didn't speak about Callahan, but about Emily, the 25-year-old dreamer who loved photography and always helped others. Her voice broke as she described enduring Christmases without her daughter. Several jurors bowed their heads, hiding emotions. In closing arguments, the prosecution stressed that Callahan lived freely for 24 years, blending into the community, enjoying trust, while the Carters bore unending pain. He didn't just kill a person, he stole a life and left a permanent void in the hearts of those who loved her. The defense, knowing their chances were slim, urged the jury to consider initial investigative shortcomings and reasonable doubt. But as the jury left to deliberate, no one in the courtroom doubted the verdict's direction. Less than 4 hours later, the jury returned. The judge read the verdict. Robert Callahan was guilty of first-degree murder and kidnapping. The room held its breath until those words rang out. Then emotions surged. Linda hugged her sons tightly, tears streaming but eyes resolute. Callahan stood motionless, glancing briefly at the Carters before turning away. The judge sentenced him to life without parole. Before concluding, he allowed Linda to speak. She stepped to the podium, voice clear. "We waited 24 years to hear the truth and see justice served. Today doesn't erase the pain, but at least we know he'll never harm anyone else." The courtroom stood and applauded, a rare moment in the solemn space. As Callahan was led away, cameras followed his every step, closing a long journey of investigation, persistence, and unwavering faith. But for the Carters, the verdict wasn't the end, it was a new beginning, where they could remember Emily without the haunting question of, who did it? Callahan's life sentence not only closed a nearly quarter-century cold case, but left a profound legacy in Denver and Colorado. The next day, local papers ran photos of Linda Carter leaving the courthouse, still holding Emily's picture. No one saw complete relief in her, rather the calm of someone who'd endured a long journey, knowing justice had come, but at a steep cost. Denver's community began discussing the case as a turning point for handling long unsolved disappearances and murders. State lawmakers proposed a bill to expand funding for DNA and genetic genealogy, tentatively called the Emily Carter Act. If passed, it would ensure qualifying cold cases are retested with new technology, no matter how much time has passed. The Denver Public Library, where Callahan worked, established a scholarship in Emily's name for students in photography and investigative journalism. The board also held community workshops on personal safety and spotting suspicious behavior, reminding people that friendliness doesn't always mean safety. Rachel Smith, who led the reinvestigation, became a frequent speaker at law enforcement conferences. In talks, she stressed that the case was solved not just by technology, but by the victims' families' persistence and the value of small clues. If Earl Simmons' letter had been ignored forever, we might never have found Callahan, she said at a Boulder workshop. Linda Carter, though no longer holding annual vigils, joined support groups for families of the missing. She used her story to encourage perseverance, stressing that truth can be found even decades later. "I don't promise your outcome will be like mine," she often said, "but I promise you'll never be alone." For many Denverites, the Emily Carter case became a reminder of trust's fragility and the need for vigilance. Schools added personal safety education, teaching students how to handle stranger approaches, especially in late shift or isolated settings. Some local businesses voluntarily adopted policies to escort employees to parking lots after shifts, a direct lesson from the tragedy. Law enforcement reviewed all pre-2005 cold cases, aiming to apply new technology. Emily's case became a training example for detectives, highlighting the importance of long-term evidence preservation and interagency coordination. However, the case's legacy wasn't solely positive. It left a painful echo of missed opportunities. Many still criticized the 1997 crime scene handling, believing stricter protocols might have found Emily sooner. A Denver Post editorial wrote, "Justice came, but we can't deny we let a killer live among us for nearly 25 years. This is a failure we must not repeat." The Callahan family largely vanished from public life post-trial. Their home was sold, and some relatives left the city. They declined all interviews, leaving speculation about how much they knew or suspected of Robert's actions. For many, this showed how one person's crime can cast a shadow over an entire family. A year after the verdict, Civic Center Park held a small ceremony to dedicate a memorial bench for Emily, inscribed, "Justice may come late, but it is still justice." Linda sat there, silently reading the words, while Rachel stood nearby, holding flowers. They didn't need many words. Both knew this journey had changed them forever. The Emily Carter case lives on in Denver's collective memory, not just as a tragedy, but as a warning. It reminds us that truth can be buried, but with enough time, effort, and resolve, it will rise from the past's thick ice. For those who knew Emily, her greatest legacy is the strength to keep fighting for their justice and for others still missing out there. The Emily Carter case in Denver isn't just a 24-year journey to solve a cold case. It reflects ongoing issues in American society today. That Robert Callahan lived among the community for nearly a quarter century, building a kindly neighbor and model employee image at the library, shows that criminals don't always look suspicious. This underscores the importance of vigilance and critical thinking. Safety can't be judged by appearances or reputation alone. The case also highlights the vital role of DNA technology and genetic genealogy in solving crimes, especially cold cases. The lesson for communities is to support investment in forensic science and long-term evidence preservation, as a single thread can lead to truth. Another key point is the power of persistence from victims' families. Linda Carter never gave up, and Earl Simmons' letter, seemingly insignificant in 2003, became a critical piece to reopen the case. This emphasizes that in real life, every detail, however small, holds value if carefully recorded and preserved. Finally, the case is a warning about community responsibility. Listen to witnesses, support victims, and be ready to question when something feels off. In America today, as cities still face violent crime and disappearances, the message is clear. Justice may come late, but it only comes if we never stop seeking it. If you believe stories like Emily Carter's deserve to be heard and remembered, hit subscribe to join us in the pursuit of truth. Thank you for following along. See you in the next video with more shocking cases where justice finally spoke.